Well, good morning, everyone. When Vickie sent me an email must have been a couple of months ago now, and asked if I would be willing to speak at a Recipe for Success event, I rashly said yes, not really knowing what I was letting myself in for. I certainly didn't expect to see my photograph all over WhatsApp, which I found most disconcerting. But yeah, I thought, well, I'm not entirely convinced that, there's a real valid reason for people to listen, but if you are here, then I guess I may as well share. So, this is very difficult because they haven't given me any kind of guidelines. I thought at least there'd be somebody sitting next to me and asking me some questions. But no, I've been given a mic and I'm meant to just ramble on. So, bear with me. Where do I start? Evan's just really gone through my LinkedIn page for you. So effectively just read you my CV. But maybe I can take it from a slightly different angle. Since the event is called Recipes for Success, I may just want to start with what I think, for me personally, are 4 attributes, characteristics, which are really, really fundamental for success. And they're quite personal. It may not be the same for you. There are definitely threads which I think a lot of people can identify with, but not necessarily. So what do I think are my recipes for success? And then I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, and you can decide if I'm actually successful or not, because I mean, that's open for debate. So my recipes, I think, are as follows, my ingredients. Faith. I have a really strong faith in God. And it's not a kind of thing where it's abstract, it's out there. For me, God is really real, and everything that I've been able to achieve over the course of the getting on to 50 years of my life, I really attribute to Him in a really personal and concrete way. My second is hard work. I don't think there's any shying away from that. I have a friend who talks about heavy lifting, my banker actually, and she says, lots of times in Africa, and she works for the African Import-Export Bank based in Cairo. They're our major financiers for the Hilton Hotel. And so she meets people across the continent. They have offices north, east, west, and south. And she does actually mention the fact that very often in the continent, there seems to be an aversion for heavy lifting, for hard work. That for me is a critical ingredient in terms of a recipe for success. The third is not very comfortable. It's sacrifice. In my life, certainly, my experience, and I know it's different for everyone, but my experience has certainly been success has been interwoven with having to make sacrifices. And finally, perseverance. You can work hard and then give up before you reach your goal. To actually get to where you want to go, it really takes perseverance. So those for me are the 4 critical ingredients. And now I'll just maybe tell you a little bit about myself in a more sort of looser context than the LinkedIn page. So you know my name, you know where I'm from. I went to school in Sierra Leone. I went to St. Joseph's Convent. How many St. Joseph girls are there in this room? Yay! Esther Fidelis, go! Yes, we really need to do better, girls. We're kind of lagging behind everyone else. I hear it's our 150-year anniversary. Yes. We need to do something about it. Sure. Okay, so I went to St. Joseph's, and I was in the same class, in fact, as 2 ladies there, Oya and Kule, who were sitting in those seats, and at the same time as America, who was a couple of years behind us. And that feels like a lifetime ago in some ways, but in other ways it feels like it was just yesterday. Finished at St. Joseph's and went to Furby College, where I read economics. And from there, I went to the LSE, to the London, well actually before LSE, in those days, and I believe it still exists, there was an organization, or there is an organization called ISEC, Students of Economics and Management. We revived it. My year group revived it in Furby College. And I was elected onto the ISEC executive. So when I finished my degree, I was invited to work with ISEC International in Brussels. So that was a fantastic experience, a lot of travel, a lot of seeing different environments, students operating and businesses operating, because a big part of what ISEC was about was linking students to business. So I think my involvement with business really started very early on. I want to jump back a little bit to school, and I want to tie it into that hard work thing. So in school, and I know some of you have kids, some of you might already be going through this sort of thing. You know how you have the kids at school who just are always making trouble and getting into trouble at back of the class, and they're really cool kids. So like I really wanted to be one of those kids, and I really wasn't. But one of the things which I think really started in school days was a determination to do the best that I could. So I always wanted to be first. I meet my teachers now and they say to me, I remember you when you would come and meet me for that 1 mark, because that 1 mark meant you beat Gita Matani. I'm like, yes. But competitiveness it has its pros and its cons. Mainly, if you manage it well, it's a pro, right? So that's something that I've encouraged in my own children, and I encourage the people that I work with, that you strive to be the best. So I'm jumping back to university, finished university, ISEC, Brussels, and then London School of Economics. Then I started working at Anderson's, where, as was said in the readout, I worked mainly in financial services, providing consulting services to really big international companies, banks in the City of London, as well as for the Bank of England. And many of you are too young to remember this, but there was a famous meltdown in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s with Barings Bank, the collapse of Barings Bank. That was an investigation that I was part of. Really extraordinary experience, working with very, very senior levels, so the equivalent of our governor of the Bank of Sierra Leone here, working with the governor of the Bank of England. So tremendous experience, a lot of exposure at a very young age. So the thread coming through is hard work, faith, sacrifice, perseverance. That stage in my life was a stage where the things that shone probably most were hard work. But the question of faith began to come in more and more, because it was during that time that the war started in Sierra Leone. So for me, leaving Sierra Leone and going to London was always a transitionary experience. I never planned to settle abroad. My heart, for as long as I can remember, has been for Sierra Leone. I don't know why. Sometimes I say to God, why do I care so much about this country? I mean, I've got so many friends who just pack their bags and go, and they never look back, and they really don't care. And it's not a bad thing, because everybody's different, right? I mean, you can't ask everyone to be the same. You can't expect it of everyone. But for some reason, I've always had Sierra Leone in my heart. This year will be 30 years since my husband and I have been together. And I look back, and on our first date, I mean, this is going to sound so naff, but on our first dates, we were praying and fasting for Sierra Leone. I mean, this was 30 years ago, and we thought Sierra Leone was bad then. Little did we know what was coming down the road. Those were the days when at Fairbank College, we didn't have water, and we had to, Natty Hyde and Beethoven were taking buckets and going up to the tank to get water when there was no electricity, and we're studying for major exams by candlelight. And we're like, no, this has got to stop. We've got to change this. And we began to pray and wait on the Lord. And it feels like it's been a really long journey. But I want to just say that in those times, this is not meant to be church, so forgive me. But church is in my heart, so some of what I'll say will just be who I am, okay? So at that time, my husband received a scripture, which has been, and I can't not say this because it's been such a big part of our journey. And it was from Numbers 13 verse 30. And it was Joshua and Caleb. And the spies had gone out to Canaan to look at the land, the 12 spies, and they came back and everybody was like, oh, doom and gloom. And Caleb said, go forth and possess the land, because we certainly can. And back in 1985, my husband had that word for Sierra Leone and for us as a family. And that's been a bedrock of everything that we've ever done. So when I talk about faith in terms of my walk, my journey, what it is we've accomplished or not accomplished, it's all relative. It's been because we had a goal. We had a goal, and that goal hasn't moved. Our goal was to be a part of developing Sierra Leone. And that's really been something which has enabled the perseverance and the sacrifice, because we've known where we're going to, even when the times have been really rough, and there have been some rough times. So, I'm in the 90s, and the war starts, and I'm working at Anderson's, and I've been telling everybody that I'm going back to Sierra Leone. I mean, it became a joke in the office. Whenever there was an assignment and they wanted to schedule me, they'd come to my office and check, Yvonne, are you going to be here, or are you going back to Sierra Leone? And it was like, and then this was like 1991, and then it became, as things got worse, it became more and more difficult for me to see how I could just go back to Sierra Leone at that time. So that plan was put on hold. In 1999, on the 6th of January, most people will definitely remember that day, even if you weren't physically here. It was the day when the rebels came into Freetown, and 3,000 people died in a day. I was at work in London, and one of my partners had been on a plane, and he'd seen the news. Philip Broadley, still a dear friend, and he came into my office, and he said, when I just saw this on the news, and there was a child the same age as my daughter, what can I do? And I had already been calling the usual NGOs who are on the TV screens when there's a disaster, making appeals. So I had called Save the Children, and I can't remember which other one, and said, you know, what are you doing? How can we engage? Didn't really get anything concrete that I felt comfortable with. It felt like it was just words without them really being on the ground. So I said to Philip at the time, don't do anything. Give me a few days and I'll get back to you. That evening, I called a friend, a dear friend, Rennie, who's also from St. Joseph's, and I said, we've got to do something. We met for a drink in a wine bar in Haymarket, and we talked about what we could do. And that was the start of SLWT, which is the Sierra Leone War Trust for Children. So 1999, April, we registered it as a charity, and in those early years during the war, what we did was we engaged with women and children who were displaced. When the war ended, we went straight up into the north, and we were able to work with the community there, the Thwamathinki community. And for 7 years, we supported that community with farming projects, building wells, a school, a health clinic, etc. From that, we worked with ex-child soldiers in Songo, and currently we are, and have been for the last 6 years, supporting disadvantaged girls through FAWE School. So FAWE is the Federation of African Women Educationalists. They have free schools for disadvantaged girls. They've got one in Ford Street and one in Waterloo. So for the last 6 years, what we've done as SWT is to support the girls, because these are girls who are poor, couldn't really afford to go to good schools. They can go to the primary school because that's free, but if they get good grades, they don't really make it to the Annie Walsh's or the St. Joseph's. I mean, the fees are also to be standard, but their cost of uniforms and cost of just lunch, transport. So we take every year the top 10, 20 girls in class 7. So what they call NPSC. It used to be common entrance, but you know. NPSC. We take the top performers, and then we finance them, we give them scholarships and mentoring through school. And we've actually now got, from our early cohorts, we've got 2 girls who are in medical school, and also a girl who's doing accountancy. We've supported over 60 girls, and that's something that continues. And now with Ebola, we've also engaged as a separate project with Ebola orphans, working with them when the outbreak was still on. So we have 50 kids, Ebola orphans under the age of 50, where we're under the age of 5, under the age of 50, that'd be me, under the age of 5, where we are providing care support to them. We don't believe in orphanages, so we're supporting them through their caregivers, family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents, etc. So in the last 17 years, SLWT has raised almost $1 million, and we don't use our money for overheads. We really try to avoid that because that's what we see the standard NGOs doing. So we tend to partner with an existing organization. What we do, what we bring is, we're just a small organization, right? There's 7 of us, 7 Sierra Leoneans living in the UK. And we raise money innovatively. So we have an annual 5K run. So I'm complaining about putting on weight because I did run last September, not trained at all, I almost died. But we do an annual 5K run. We do jazz nights, we do art exhibitions, and we also appear on the media. So that's how we raise the funds, and then we work through organizations here. Recently, we've actually now engaged a staff and have an office in Waterloo ourselves, because it's just proving to be more efficient, but we do keep our costs down and we make sure that the beneficiaries really get as much of what's raised. So $1 million sounds a lot, but over 17 years, it's actually not that much per year, but it does make a difference to the people whose lives we touch. Perseverance. I'm coming back to my recipe ingredients. There was a time, it must have been in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was really, really struggling. I had 2 children. I had a daughter in 96 and then a son in 99. So I was a mum, I was a senior director in Anderson's, traveling a lot in Europe, working very long hours, managing the kids, trying to manage SLWT, the charity, because I'm chair of the charity, managing the home, and we had started a small property portfolio. And I remember one day just saying, I can't do this anymore. And I called, they sent an email to the other charity trustees and said, look guys, let's meet. We need to wind this down. We're not as young as we were when we started. We've got competing responsibilities and we just can't keep this going. But I couldn't. You know, I prayed about it and I just I didn't have the peace. So I kept going. And I really am so glad that we did. Because now when I look at those kids whose lives we have impacted in the past 5 years, every additional hour of staying up, doing some, admin thing for SWT or some fundraiser was time well spent because it was time impacting somebody else's life. So that's SLWT. A little bit about me. I was doing the business. But as one does, I don't know if you're as boring as we are. In fact, that hard work thing, let me just give you a little joke. I was saying to Kule last night that one of the things that really strikes me about the choices one has to make if you're seeking success, and I have to tell you, I'm not seeking success. I never even think about it as success. I think about trying to achieve a goal. I think it's maybe from the outside perspective, it's deemed as success. And maybe that's something else that's kind of an ingredient that's worth thinking about. Maybe it's good not to be caught up in success. Maybe what you need to really be caught up in is what it is you want to achieve, as opposed to how you want to be perceived. So I was saying to Kule that I think so often of the Friday nights when all our friends who were younger than, in fact, my parents came to stay during the war. And there was one day when my dad said to me and Keith, don't you guys ever go out? Like, go have a drink, go have a dance or something. We would be in the office. We have an office at home. On a Friday night, working. He'd be sitting there and I'd be sitting there. And sometimes we look at ourselves and we're like, we're sad. Because there's something that needs to be done. There's something that needs to be finished. And we want it to be finished because we want to deliver quality in everything that we do. We want to meet a standard, in the way that we approach our work. So we did that. I was saying about idea. So 2004, one of those nights when other people would be like, having a drink down at the pub or whatever, we were a boring old couple in the study office working, and Keith was searching for something, I guess, and came across a website which purported to be about a tourism development in Sierra Leone. We didn't like the look of it. It looked very concrete, heavy. I don't know how many people in the room know a place called Benidorm? No, okay. So it's a resort in Spain, which is very, very tacky. And it looked like that. And we, and when I say tech, I mean it's lots of buildings. The opposite of an environmentally eco-friendly, something just lots of buildings, high-rise. And that's what it looked like. And we thought, no, not for Sierra Leone. So we tried to reach the people, we eventually did. Long story short, it was an idea of a family who became co-investors with us in what eventually was the MAPIT project. So idea in 2004 was the start of a company whose vision it was to develop real estate and infrastructure in Sierra Leone. 2004, this is 2016. It's a long time. Getting the things, developing the things which are big dreams don't happen quickly. They don't happen overnight. It really requires perseverance. So in 2004, Keith reached out to these people. The company was set up. They were a family, the Stephanopoulos family, who become very, very dear friends as well as business partners, whose parentage was from Kafabulam in Port Loko chiefdom, and as we all know, Port Loko district rather. And as we all know, because of the land laws in Sierra Leone, you can't hold land freehold outside of Western area. So if you're going to do a major investment outside of the Western area, you do need to be partnering with a land owning or land holding family from the area. So we started that relationship, and for the next 2 years, Keith stayed in his company. He was working for a company called Amy Ventures. Keith stayed in this company, really working on this idea, weekends, evenings, etc. I didn't get involved at all at that stage. And then when he turned 40, and he turned 50 last year, when he turned 40, his big thing was that he was going to resign from work so that he could give more time to developing idea as a company so that we could develop Sierra Leone. So I had this thing, and you know, my mother-in-law and I were really good friends, so I can say this, even though she's not here. My mother-in-law called my mother and said, "What are you doing? You are making your child tell my son to leave his work to go develop Sierra Leone? Are you crazy?" Everybody, not just my mother-in-law, everybody thought we were mad. You are doing a business. He is the only one with a regular income, and you're now going to resign so that you guys can focus on Sierra Leone. They thought we were crazy, but we continued. We do a lot of crazy things. That's sort of part of who we are as well. So we continued, and in 2007, so up until about 2009, Keith was still doing weekends, evenings, but he was consulting, so working for himself, so he had more flexibility. So he could take time off and come to Sierra Leone. You know, he could manage his own time. He wasn't sort of clocking. Oh gosh, I have to be careful about the time, right? How are we doing?
Go ahead, you're fine, you're good.
Yeah? Okay. All right. So 2000. So we get to 2009, and Keith is still doing consultancy, and I'm still running Caleb, and I'm still doing SWT. And then I come to Sierra Leone that summer. Oh no, it wasn't summer, it was March. I come to Sierra Leone for a review visit of our project in Songo, where we were doing the agricultural training school with these ex-child soldiers. And I'm spending time with young ladies who've been raped and gone through so much during the war, and who are now trying to pick up their lives. We've given training, loans, etc. But I was so struck by one thing. I was so struck by the fact that the overall environment within which these kids were working or living was such that for everything that we did to take them forward, they could still be taken backwards, because there's so much that wasn't right in the society generally, in terms of their opportunities, in terms of economic growth, etc. And I arrived back, and I remember dates like this, I arrived back in London on the 17th of March 2009, and when Keith picked me up, I said to him, okay, because he'd been hassling me to get involved in IDEA, and I said, no, I don't have the time. And I said, okay, I'm ready, let's do this. What we're doing with SWT is like when you have a gangrenous wound, and you take a plaster, and you're trying to put a plaster on it. You need something much more radical. I need to do something much more transformative than just putting a plaster on a wound. So let's do it. So what did that mean? That meant really giving up all the security. So me stopping work as well. You know, sort of winding down the business and putting all our efforts and energy on developing idea. So that was March 2009. And I'm now going to really wind forward because it'll take me forever to tell you all of this. So long and short of it is, we launched with MAPE. We went out because we really believe in participative involvement. We were trying to get Sierra Leoneans to buy into the idea. So we actually looked for investors among the Sierra Leone community. And I think there's something interesting here as well, which maybe is a takeaway. We had people saying things like, invest in the company, but we don't own Salomon, they will take the money. We didn't really get very far with that idea, but we did get some investors. And with our kind of doggedness, we went on to secure the land at MAPE, went through Parliament, Cabinet, etc., and got it transferred to a 1,000-year lease, which was a groundbreaker. And subsequently, we won the bid for Cape Sierra, which was actually being offered as a bid. And the bid was being led by or managed by the World Bank, so it was a transparent bid. And it's probably important at this point to say that one of our sort of markers on the road, there's nothing that can change it for us, is integrity. We absolutely believe that without integrity, Sierra Leone is going nowhere. The corruption and bribery is actually what is taking us backwards and will continue to take us backwards. Whenever the playing field isn't even, merit then isn't what wins. It's contacts and connections, and that actually hampers successful delivery and implementation. So for us, not paying bribes is non-negotiable, which means it's a bit challenging. So we faced challenges. We faced serious challenges. And perseverance really came into the fore. And I'm not going to go into that. There are people in this room who kind of follow that journey closely. But suffice it to say, it took us years to move from winning the bid to being able to get all our documents signed. There were challenges which weren't because of governance issues. There were challenges which were because of the infrastructure in Sierra Leone. We chose Hilton as a brand to partner with us for the bid. We could have gone for a different brand. People used to say to us, why, in fact, people still say to us, I actually was with a hotelier last weekend from Mali, and he said, why did you go for Hilton? They're so expensive as an operator. So we're the developer, we own the site, we own the property, we raise the money, it's our hotel. But we have a contract with an operator who manages and operates the hotel. That operator, as part of your contract, determines the standards that you build to. You build to their brand standards. Hilton standards are expensive. So why did we choose Hilton? We chose Hilton because we believe in doing the best for Sierra Leone. It's not about your bottom line. Yes, as a developer, you'll make less money because your costs are going to be higher. But for Sierra Leone, Hilton is the most recognized name for hotels globally. And for us as a country, with the history of the war, and now the history of Ebola, what we really needed was something where, when it's said, it takes away, it dispels some of the concerns that people might have about the country because they have a feel-good factor. There's a recognition, and they just kind of like, oh, Hilton's there, oh, it must be okay. So we went for Hilton, and thankfully Hilton went for us because they appreciated our values and what we were delivering. And I think with the hotel, I'm going to just use that to highlight one of my ingredients, and that's the sacrifice one. So it's kind of crazy because the hotel overall cost is in excess of $80 million. Do I look like someone who has $80 million?
Yes, you do.
No, I don't. Well, I can assure you I don't. We had to raise that finance. And raising finance of that magnitude for infrastructure in Sierra Leone, private, not government, private, is a challenge. It's a challenge for a number of reasons. One, with extractive industries, when someone's coming to invest in a mine, they know that what they get, they're taking out. They don't have to, it doesn't matter what's going on in your country. You could be at war, they don't care. They can get their minerals out. With real estate, hospitality, what is going on in the country really matters, because that stability is necessary for you to have the people coming in and the revenues to repay your financing. So that's something which was a challenge. The other thing, of course, is our business climate. And that's something which, I'm going to get to this about what we can all do. That's something where, very often in Sierra Leone, people forget that the world is a competitive stage. Nobody does anything for Sierra Leone just because. When you are raising money for Sierra Leone, you're competing with people raising money for projects in Côte d'Ivoire, in Mozambique, in Senegal, in countries where their GDP is growing, where they've got stable political environments, where they've got good business climate, they've got laws and they've got policies which are actually attractive to foreign investors. I didn't even mention Ghana and Nigeria. So, Nigeria has its own problems, but because of the size of its market, it's very attractive to investors. So that's what we're up against when we're trying to raise funding. But the Lord God had said, and what the Lord God says, He delivers. So that faith again. So we went through a period. Actually, the first fundraise was incredibly fast. We were awarded the bid in August 2010. In January 2011, in December 2010, I had a conversation with a banker in Nigeria, and he just mentioned African Import-Export Bank. And I Googled them. And I realized that they had a product which was really, really geared to investing in countries like ours and supporting tourism infrastructure, because they believe, as we all should realize, that actually in terms of an export and a foreign exchange earner, tourism is as important. In some ways, it's even more achievable and deliverable in terms of what we can get as a country than the minerals that people are always chasing after. So, in January 2011, I jumped on a plane, and I used to do this a lot, just jump on a plane and took myself to Cairo and made an appointment to go see Kanayo Awani, the Director of Trade Investments in FXM Bank. Her colleague or assistant had been kind of fobbing me off. She was in the office and he'd been fobbing me off by email and phone, and he didn't really want to set this thing up. And I was like, you know something, I'm just going to take a risk. I'm just going. So I did, and had a really good conversation. Suffice it to say, miracles along the way. But in April 2011, this was a record for the bank, for FXM. In April 2011, we were given or finalized the funding for $42 million. And at the time, we only needed to raise $55 million. So between that and other sources, we were done. And the groundbreaking was done in September 2011 at Cape Sierra, and the president turning of the soil and everything. And then the trouble started. The trouble started in as much as, and this is why I said it's a combination. It's not just the governance, but it's also the issues in Sierra Leone, some of our challenges because of where we are in our development or where we're not in our development. So for the groundbreaking ceremony, or the turning of the soil, the vice president of Hilton came. Radisson wasn't here at the time, so he stayed at the Bintamani. There was no water that day. The Guma Bowser didn't turn up. He was given a Tutik water bottle for his shower. And when he asked for a second one, he was told he had to pay. So he was furious.
Wow.
But that in itself, in a way, was like a good thing, because it really underlined the business case for why we needed to build the Hilton. But the bad thing was that there was a nervousness with Hilton about relying on utility provision in Sierra Leone. So Once we started working on the detailed plans, because with Hilton, you sign all the contracts based on the concept, but there is, you are within the contract obliged then to make the adjustments required by their architects and designers to meet their standards. So once they started to work on the detail, very quickly, 3 things happened. We provide our own water. So it means we have to build a desalination plant on the site. So we're building a plant on that site now where water's coming from the sea, it's being treated and providing the hotel. So the hotel has 24/7 water of a quality the Hilton are satisfied with. It was the same with power. They weren't going to do the lights go off, the lights come on thing. They weren't having it. 24/7 power means we have to build our own power plant. So we have our own power plant on the site. And then there was the geology. That site has some incredible rock. And when we were doing, Kool-Aid's left, but Kool-Aid, the lady who was sitting next to Mem, their engineering firm did the initial geotech studies. And we knew there was rock, but we didn't know what that rock was like. I mean, that rock is the mother of all rocks, believe me. Even now, so the first thing we had to do was we had to tilt the design. So we had to move the design because we just couldn't get through to the rock. So that cost. Long and short of it, the hotel bill went from 55 million to over 80. So we had to stop. So January 2012, having had all the publicity, all the fanfare, all of a sudden the bank said, okay, if your cost has gone up, you don't move. You find the money before you continue. Their reasoning is simple. In project finance, you don't have, the asset is what the bank's security is. The banks don't want you to start a project and then you can't finish it, because then they don't have anything to fall back on. A half-finished building is nothing. It's meaningless. So we had cleared the site, we demolished the hotel, and then it was stop. Stop. And I was like, God, what? And of course, all of Sierra Leone were going, not taking money, all kinds of things in the newspapers about us. And then we also had the more serious conversations going on in political circles of, they're not getting money enough to take Canada and. So we had then a real challenge again. So I said perseverance, I said hard work, I said sacrifice. By this stage, we are now in 2012. And we started this journey of giving up our jobs and everything in 2009. So we're 3 years in of not having any income. We had a portfolio of properties because we did have a business before. So we're kind of selling off our business, selling off our properties. But sacrifices had to be made. And in 2013, we were able to secure financing, which enabled us to start moving a little bit. Well, really enabled us to save the project, because by that time, everybody was trying to take it from us. We really were just paying the banks to keep the lines open. I want to tell you a quick story about sacrifice. Going around the world, trying to raise this finance, coming up against Sierra Leone. Don't you have a war there? I was like, no, it finished 13 years ago. We didn't have Ebola, but it was still like, how many people in that country again? 6 million. Oh, it's a small place. And that's what investors are concerned about. And for all the beauty that we have here, we haven't done a good job of telling the world about it. So most people's mindset, when it comes to investment, they might think about your iron ore because that message is out. But even so, if you're not in that space, they don't really want to know. So I've come back from a trip to Nigeria where we're trying to get some investment. And this is now October 2013. And I had received a note in the door from someone, this is just random. Someone asking if our house was for sale. This is our house in Wimbledon, which I loved, don't have it anymore. And I received this note, and I was like, what rubbish, throw it out. We're we're not going to sell our house. We've already sold my car by then, that my husband gave me for my 40th birthday. It came in a big ribbon. And I had to sell it. Because, you know, you have to. If you are investing in a business, you have to keep meeting the bills. And you have to find that money from somewhere. And if you're not, you know, if you're not working, you divest. And it's part of letting go. It's very cathartic. You know, you get into the zone after a while. It takes a while. So I get this note and I tear it up. And then I come back on my trip and my husband says to me, we're sitting at the kitchen table and he says, Yvonne, if nothing happens in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna have to sell the house. And I was like, I can't believe you're saying that. Where's your faith? I can't believe you're saying that. Stormed away from the kitchen, went up to the bedroom, shut the door, cried my eyes out. And I torn this note, right? Remember I had this note some time ago and I tore this note up. And then my kids come into the bedroom and like, Mommy, what's wrong? Why are you crying? I was like, maybe we have to sell the house. And my son, who then, he's 13 now, he's 16 now, so he must have been 13. My son says to me, Mommy, change is good. And I was like, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to hear this. We've made so many sacrifices already. I don't want to hear this. But that evening, I continued to pray and continued to talk to God. And I really felt such peace eventually. God saying, you know what? I gave it to you. I always give it to you back. Just let it go. So I went to bed, I woke up in the morning, and I felt as light as a daisy. I woke up and I was like, the sun is shining, I have health, I have my kid, what's a house? You know, and I called my good friend, who is an interior designer, and she's very, very creative, very good at sourcing properties. I was like, Josie, help me look for a house to rent. We're selling our house. And then I thought, and she's like, okay, fine, are you sure? I was like, I'm sure. And then I thought, somebody approached us about buying our house. But I tore that up, and I didn't really read the letter. And I sort of started pondering, and I was like, Keith, do you remember that letter? I was like, yes. I was like, I'm gonna go find those people. I was like, well, who are they? Now this is really going to sound weird, but God is God. And as I sat there, thinking about this, I really felt Vineyard Hill Road. That's a road in Wimbledon, which is where we live. Vineyard Hill Road. And I was like, Keith, I'm going to Vineyard Hill Road. He said, what are you going to do? Just go up and down the street, knock on every door? I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to Vineyard Hill Road. So I got in the car and I started driving to Vineyard Hill Road. And as I got closer, I felt 6. So I didn't actually go to 6. I went to 61. And I rang the bell and no one answered. And I thought, oh. And then I looked to the left and 63 had a for sale sign. So I went to 63 and I rang the bell. And then this woman opens and she's thinking, what is this black woman doing on my doorstep at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning? I could see it in her face. And I was like, I'm from number 112 Cobbs Hill Road. And she's like, yes. I was like, she said, yes, come in. It's the woman who had put the letter to my door asking if we would sell our house. But so we get into a conversation, I'm like, I know this is really strange. At the time I saw your letter, I just was not in that place, but I am now. And she said, well, I'm really sorry, that was weeks ago. We've already found somewhere else, but let's stay in touch, etc. And I was like, okay, it doesn't matter. At least I know that, God's in this, because what are the chances of me finding you? And so I left. And I left with a song on my lips and just joy in my heart, because even though we were selling our house, I knew that God was still in control. And it really does become even more incredible, because long story short, their sale fell through. The house they were trying to buy, they eventually bought our house with no estate agent fees. We actually shared removal companies. And not only that, God alone can do this. They paid for our first 6 months' rent. Wow. It was unbelievable. And it was sacrifice, but like I said, it was with a silver lining. God made the land, the bump, bearable. And people said to me, oh, so you missed your house? I mean, it must have felt really hard leaving. And you know my house. you know, we had a lovely house. I mean, yeah. Anyway, and she was like, it must have been really hard. And I was like, actually, no, it wasn't. It wasn't, because God made me know that He was in it. So it's okay. You know, we're in a rented house and it's okay. We know where we're going. We're making sacrifice because we have a goal.